Think back to being 8 years old and waiting for summer vacation. Those final weeks of school felt endless, each day stretched out in a way that seems almost impossible to imagine now. And then think about the last 5 years of your adult life. They feel like they collapsed into almost nothing. A blur of weeks that somehow became years without you ever noticing them pass. This is not nostalgia. It is not selective memory. It is one of the most consistent experiences reported across cultures, across generations, across almost every adult who has lived long enough to notice it. The older you get, the faster time seems to move. A year at 40 feels shorter than a month did at 8. And at some point, most people start to feel a quiet unease about it. Not just that time is passing, but that it seems to be accelerating, moving faster with every year, with no obvious way to slow it down. The strange part is that the clock hasn't changed. 60 seconds is still 60 seconds. A year is still 365 days. Nothing about time itself has shifted. What has shifted is something inside the brain, specifically the way the brain constructs its experience of duration. And when you understand the mechanism behind it, the acceleration of time stops feeling like an inevitability and starts feeling like something that can, at least partially, be explained and addressed. It starts with a concept called the proportional theory of time, and it is the oldest and simplest explanation for this phenomenon. When you are 10 years old, 1 year represents 10% of your entire life. It is a genuinely large fraction of everything you have ever experienced. When you are 40, that same year represents only 2.5%. When you are 70, it is less than 1.5%. According to this theory, we unconsciously experience each period of time not in absolute terms, but relative to the total amount of time we have already lived. A year feels shorter at 40, not because anything is neurologically wrong, but because it is, in a very real sense, a smaller piece of the total sum. This proportional framing is useful, but it only tells part of the story, because the mathematics alone cannot explain all of the effect. There is something else happening, something at the level of how the brain actually encodes and stores experience. The brain does not record time like a video camera. It does not create a continuous, uniform log of every moment that passes. What it does instead is encode experiences based on novelty, emotional significance, and the amount of new information being processed. The more new and meaningful experiences you have in a given period, the richer and more detailed the memory of that period becomes. And when you later look back on it, that richness of memory makes the period feel long, substantial, full. This is why a single week of travel in a completely unfamiliar country can feel, in retrospect, like it lasted a month. Everything was new. Every meal, every street, every interaction required your brain to actively process and encode information it had never encountered before. That active processing creates dense, detailed memories. And when you look back, the density of those memories creates the felt sense that a lot of time passed. Contrast that with a typical week at home inside a fixed routine. You wake up at the same time. You take the same route to work. You eat similar meals. You have similar conversations. The brain, recognizing that all of this is already known and requires no new encoding, essentially fast-forwards through it. The predictable and familiar is not worth storing in detail, so it isn't. And when you look back at that week, there is almost nothing there, just a vague impression of time having passed, with very few distinguishing features to anchor it. This is what neuroscientists and psychologists call the holiday paradox. In the present moment, a vacation feels like it passes quickly. You are engaged, stimulated, fully absorbed. But in retrospect, that same vacation feels long and rich because the brain encoded so much of it. Meanwhile, a routine week feels slow in the present, tedium stretches, but short in retrospect, because almost nothing was worth storing. You were there for 7 days, but you have almost nothing to show for it in memory. As people age, the ratio tends to shift in a very specific direction. More routine, less novelty. Not necessarily by choice, but by the logic of how adult life is structured. By your 30s and 40s, you have already navigated most of the major firsts: first job, first serious relationship, first home, first experience of significant loss. The systems are mostly in place. Life runs increasingly on established patterns. And a brain running on established patterns is a brain that stops encoding at full resolution. The psychologist William James wrote about this in 1890 with a precision that has held up remarkably well. He described the adult experience of time as one where the days and weeks smooth themselves out in recollection to contentless units, and the years grow hollow and collapse. He was identifying, well before modern neuroscience, the same mechanism that researchers now study in detail. Memory density is what gives retrospective time its weight, and routine systematically drains memory of density. There is a neurological dimension to this as well, separate from memory encoding. Children process the world through a brain that is, in a very literal sense, still building itself. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. Neural pathways are still being formed, pruned, reorganized. This means that even ordinary experiences, a drive through a familiar neighborhood, a conversation at the dinner table, require more active neural processing in a young brain than in a mature one. More processing means more time markers being laid down. More time markers means the experience feels fuller, longer, more substantial. An adult brain, by contrast, has been highly optimized for efficiency. It has developed thousands of shortcuts, automatic processing routines, pattern recognition systems, predictive mechanisms that allow it to handle familiar situations with minimal expenditure of attention or energy. This efficiency is useful in almost every practical sense, but it comes at a perceptual cost. The more efficiently the brain handles an experience, the fewer time markers it lays down, and the shorter that period feels in retrospect. This is also why significant emotional events, grief, falling in love, a moment of genuine fear, seem to stretch time. The brain, overwhelmed by incoming information it has no pre-existing script for, switches off its efficiency routines and processes everything at full resolution. Every detail gets encoded. And later, looking back at the week surrounding a major loss or a transformative experience, that period feels enormous, denser than years of ordinary life on either side of it. So the acceleration of time as we age is not one single phenomenon. It is at least three overlapping effects operating simultaneously. The proportional shrinking of each year relative to total life lived. The increasing ratio of routine to novelty, which drains memory of the density that makes retrospective time feel long, and the neurological efficiency of the mature brain, which processes familiar experience with fewer time markers, leaving less residue behind. Understanding the mechanism points, almost directly, toward what disrupts it. Novelty, deliberate, sustained exposure to new experience, new places, new skills, new social contexts, new ways of thinking, forces the brain back into active encoding mode. It does not need to be dramatic. Learning a new language at 50 creates the same effect as traveling to an unfamiliar country. Taking a different route home, having a conversation with someone whose life is nothing like yours, trying something you have never done before and are not yet competent at. All of these interrupt the efficiency routines and force the brain to process at higher resolution. And higher resolution means richer memory. And richer memory means, in retrospect, that the time feels like it actually existed. This is the practical implication that most discussions of this phenomenon leave out. The question is not simply why does time speed up? The question worth sitting with is, what is the ratio of novel to routine in your actual days? And is that ratio producing the kind of memory density that makes your life feel, in retrospect, like it is really being lived? Because the mechanism is consistent. A life run almost entirely on routine will in retrospect feel like it collapsed, not because the days weren't there, they were, but because the brain found almost none of them worth remembering in detail. Time does not speed up as you age. Your experience of it does, because experience is constructed by a brain that encodes selectively, that values novelty over familiarity, and that will, if given nothing new to process, quietly fast forward through years of your life while you are standing right inside them. The clock is still moving at exactly the same speed it always has. The question is how much of it you are actually recording.